to the wild dark storm strata beneath, it seemed that my spirits dropped with the falling ship, and the buoyancy of hope ran low in sympathy. The waves were running to tremendous heights, and the Coldwater was not designed to meet such waves head on. Her elements were the blue ether, far above the raging storm, or the greater depths of ocean which no storm could ruffle. As I stood speculating upon our chances once we settled into the frightful maelstrom beneath us, and at the same time mentally computing the hours which must elapse before aid could reach us, the wireless operator clambered up the ladder to the bridge, and, dishevelled and breathless, stood before me at salute. It needed but a glance at him to assure me that something was amiss. "What now?" I asked. "The wireless, sir," he cried. "My God, sir, I cannot send." "But the emergency outfit?" I asked. "I have tried everything, sir. I have exhausted every resource. We cannot send." And he drew himself up and saluted again. I dismissed him with a few kind words, for I knew that it was through no fault of his that the mechanism was antiquated and worthless. In common with the balance of the Coldwater's equipment, there was no finer operator in Pan America than he. The failure of the wireless did not appear as momentous to me as to him, which is not unnatural, since it is but human to feel that when our own little cog slips, the entire universe must necessarily be put out of gear. I knew that if this storm were destined to blow us across 30, or send us to the bottom of the ocean, no help could reach us in time to prevent it. I had ordered the message sent solely because regulations required it, and not with any particular hope that we could benefit by it in our present extremity. I had little time to dwell upon the coincidence of this simultaneous failure of the wireless and the buoyancy generators, since very shortly after the Coldwater had dropped so low over the waters that all my attention was necessarily centered upon the delicate business of settling upon the waves without breaking my ship's back. With our buoyancy generators in commission, it would have been a simple thing to enter the water, since then it would have been but a trifling matter of a 45-degree dive into the base of a huge wave. We should have cut into the water like a hot knife through butter, and have been totally submerged with scarce a jar. I have done it 1,000 times, but I did not dare submerge the Coldwater for fear that it would remain submerged to the end of time, a condition far from conducive to the longevity of commander or crew. Most of my officers were older men than I. John Alvarez, my first officer, is 20 years my senior. He stood at my side on the bridge as the ship glided closer and closer to those stupendous waves. He watched my every move, but he was by far too fine an officer and gentleman to embarrass me by either comment or suggestion. When I saw that we soon would touch, I ordered the ship brought around broadside to the wind, and there we hovered a moment until a huge wave reached up and seized us upon its crest. And then I gave the order that suddenly reversed the screening force and led us into the ocean. Down into the trough we went, wallowing like the carcass of a dead whale, and then began the fight, with rudder and propellers, to force the Coldwater back into the teeth of the gale and drive her on and on, farther and farther from relentless 30. I think that we should have succeeded, even though the ship was racked from stem to stern by the terrific buffetings she received, and though she were half submerged the greater part of the time, had no further accident befallen us. We were making headway, though slowly, and it began to look as though we were going to pull through. Alvarez never left my side, though I all but ordered him below for much-needed rest. My second officer, Porfirio Johnson, was also often on the bridge. He was a good officer, but a man for whom I had conceived a rather unreasoning aversion almost at the first moment of meeting him, an aversion which was not lessened by the knowledge which I subsequently gained that he looked upon my rapid promotion with jealousy. He was 10 years my senior both in years and service, and I rather think he could never forget the fact that he had been an officer when I was a green apprentice. As it became more and more apparent that the Coldwater, under my seamanship, was weathering the tempest and giving promise of pulling through safely, I could have sworn that I perceived a shade of annoyance and disappointment growing upon his dark countenance. He left the bridge finally and went below. I do not know that he is directly responsible for what followed so shortly after, but I have always had my suspicions, and Alvarez is even more prone to place the blame upon him than I. It was about 6 bells of the forenoon watch that Johnson returned to the bridge after an absence of some 30 minutes. He seemed nervous and ill at ease, a fact which made little impression on me at the time, but which both Alvarez and I recalled subsequently. Not 3 minutes after his reappearance at my side, the Coldwater suddenly commenced to lose headway. I seized the telephone at my elbow, pressing upon the button which would call the chief engineer to the instrument in the bows of the ship, only to find him already at the receiver attempting to reach me. "Numbers 1, 2, and 5 engines have broken down, sir," he called. "Shall we force the remaining 3?" "We can do nothing else," I bellowed into the transmitter. "They won't stand the gaff, sir," he returned. "Can you suggest a better plan?" I asked. "No, sir," he replied. "Then give them the gaff, Lieutenant," I shouted back, and hung up the receiver. For 20 minutes the Coldwater bucked the great seas with her 3 engines. I doubt if she advanced a foot, but it was enough to keep her nose in the wind, and at least we were not drifting toward 30. Johnson and Alvarez were at my side, when without warning the bow swung swiftly around, and the ship fell into the trough of the sea. "The other 3 have gone," I said, and I happened to be looking at Johnson as I spoke. Was it the shadow of a satisfied smile that crossed his thin lips? I do not know, but at least he did not weep. "You always have been curious, sir, about the great unknown beyond 30, he said. "You are in a good way to have your curiosity satisfied." And then I could not mistake the slight sneer that curved his upper lip. There must have been a trace of disrespect in his tone or manner which escaped me, for Alvarez turned upon him like a flash. "When Lieutenant Turck crosses 30, he said, "we shall all cross with him, and God help the officer or the man who reproaches him." "I shall not be a party to high treason," snapped Johnson. "The regulations are explicit, and if the Coldwater crosses 30, it devolves upon you to place Lieutenant Turck under arrest and immediately exert every endeavor to bring the ship back into Pan American waters." "I shall not know," replied Alvarez, "that the Coldwater passes 30, nor shall any other man aboard know it." And with his words he drew a revolver from his pocket, and before either I or Johnson could prevent it, had put a bullet into every instrument upon the bridge, ruining them beyond repair. And then he saluted me, and strode from the bridge, a martyr to loyalty and friendship, for though no man might know that Lieutenant Jefferson Turck had taken his ship across 30, every man aboard would know that the first officer had committed a crime that was punishable by both degradation and death. Johnson turned and eyed me narrowly. "Shall I place him under arrest?" he asked. "You shall not," I replied, "nor shall anyone else." "You become a party to his crime!" he cried angrily. "You may go below, Mr. Johnson," I said.